Good morning. I'm going to talk about Tamar. Tamar was the daughter of King David. The name Tamar means date palm, which suggests food security and life. Tamar was the beautiful daughter of the great King David, and her mother's name was Maachah. Maachah was a princess from a neighboring kingdom. Now, just to give you a little background about King David was the one who saw Bathsheba up on the rooftop. And even though he had several wives and several concubines, because he seen Bathsheba bathing up on the rooftop, he wanted her. And so he sent his soldiers to go and to get her, even though he knew that Bathsheba was married to one of his number one men, Uriah, who Uriah was fighting a war for King David at that time. So what King David did was he went and he had Bathsheba brought to him. He slept with Bathsheba while Uriah was out fighting the war for him, and Bathsheba wound up getting pregnant. Now, when he found out that Bathsheba was pregnant, King David tried to hide the fact that she had gotten pregnant by him. So what he did was he sent for Uriah and had Uriah brought in from the war, and in hopes that Uriah would come in, be so happy to be home from the war, and would sleep with his wife, and it would look like that he had gotten his wife pregnant. But Uriah did not. Uriah was so dedicated to King David that he never even went home and slept with his wife. So then King David had to come up with another plan. So what he then did was he sent Uriah back to war, and he had given instructions to put Uriah right up in the front, on the front line, so Uriah would get killed. So nobody would ever know that Bathsheba had gotten pregnant by somebody else besides her husband. And Uriah wound up getting killed, and everybody thought that Bathsheba was pregnant by her husband because he had come in from war, when in fact it was by King David. Okay, so then years later, King David had another wife. He had a total of 8 wives, and one of his wives, her name was Maachah, which she was a princess from a neighboring kingdom. She wound up having a very beautiful daughter by the name of Tamar. And so what David did was, because he had so many wives and so many concubines, he had children, and his children were siblings and had half sibling, what we call, a half sister and a half brother, by several different women. So one of his children by a different wife, his name was Amnon, I think that's how you pronounce it, excuse me, Amnon, which was David's first child, his first son, his oldest son. He got this great obsession for his half-sister Tamar because she was very beautiful. And he watched her as she grew up, and he just obsessed from her. I mean, just like every chance that he got, he was around Tamar. He would try to arrange times that him and Tamar could be along, but because Tamar was so beautiful, and because she was a princess of the king, the harem of the king's court wouldn't allow her to be alone. And so, I mean, this went on for years, where he just thought about it, and he would just look at her and just, oh my goodness, he wanted her so bad. Now, back in those days, it was legal for siblings to marry one another. However, it wasn't preferable. And it's believed that arrangements had been made for Tamar to be married to someone else when she became of age. And this marriage was arranged when she was just a child. And so basically what King David was waiting for was for her to get old enough to get married. And so so when she reached puberty, her half-brother Amnon developed an unnatural obsession with his young half-sister. He watched over her and he waited in places where she passed. He could not get enough of her presence, and above all, he wanted to possess her. The catch was that he was not prepared to marry her. And so apparently Amnon has shared this with a cousin of his called Jonadab, because Jonadab came up with this story about what Amnon could do in order to get Tamar alone. So what Jonadab said was, well, why don't you tell King David that you're sick and that you can't eat, and the only thing that's going to make you feel better is to have your half-sister Tamar come and prepare you some food and feed you. And so then that way you could get Tamar in the room along with you. And so then that's what Amnon did. He went and he got in his bed. He acted like he was so sick. They had the doctors come and check him out. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And so since Amnon was the eldest son, this kind of worried King David, because if something was to happen to King David, then it was prepared that Amnon would be the one that would take over as the king. So he had to make sure that Amnon was very well taken care of. So when King David found out that his eldest son was sick, of course he went to his son, and, oh, son, what's wrong? And so then Amnon gave his dad, King David, the story about he was sick, and the only thing that would make him feel any better was to have his half-sister Tamar come and prepare him some food and feed him. So King David, not thinking anything of it, it's like, okay, you guys are siblings. Okay, sure, that would be a natural thing to have your sister come and prepare some food for you. And so then he sent for his daughter Tamar, excuse me, and requested that she go and prepare food for her half-brother Amnon. Now, from the indication that I got, I don't believe that Tamar was aware that her brother had this obsession with her. I mean, she was young, she was beautiful, she was a virgin. She was just going about life, just doing what it was that I guess young girls did at that time. And so, I mean, when her dad sent for her and requested that she go and she prepare the food for her brother, then of course, this is my brother. I want to help take care of my brother. I want to please my dad. So of course, I'm going to go and prepare this food and feed my brother, and preferably, he'll get better. So what happened was that when Tamar got there, she started preparing the food, and then Amnon, there was other people that were in the room at the same time. And so then what Amnon did was he started screaming and yelling and threw a big old tantrum, and he ordered everybody out of the room, because still on the premise that he was sick and he didn't want to be bothered with a lot of people. He only wanted his sister to be there. So he ordered everybody out of the room. And so Tamar, she continued doing what she was doing, preparing the food for her brother. And so once she prepared the food for him, she went to serve it to him. But then he was like, no, come closer. You need to feed me, my sister. And so then she, still trying innocent, trying to help her brother, she went closer to him to feed him. And then when she got closer to Amnon, he grabbed her and he threw her down on the bed, and he began to molest her, to rape her. And she was screaming and and saying, no, brother, don't do this to me, this is not right. And he ignored her, and he continued to rape her. And so then when he finished raping her, after that, he his feelings for her just suddenly changed, just like that, which is often the way that it is, that when it's something that we know that we shouldn't be doing, and we're just so bent on getting it, we get it, and then all of a sudden we don't want it anymore because it's something that we shouldn't have had in the first place. And so after he violated his sister, what he did was he then told her, get out. He didn't want to have nothing to do with her. And so then she begged him, reminding him that, okay, well, now that you've molested me or you've raped me, you've taken my virginity, nobody else is going to want me, because it was really big back in those days that when you got married, you had to be a virgin. And so then, she begged him, well, you've had me sexually now, so why don't you just go ahead and marry me? And he wasn't trying to hear what she had to say. He was like, no, get out. And he threw her out the room, and he locked the door so she couldn't get back in. So then Tamar, she was so sad and so disheveled, and she went out, and Tamar had another brother where his name was Absalom, and her and Absalom, they had the same mother and father. With Tamar and Amnon, they had the same father, but they had different mothers. And so when Absalom seen what had happened to Tamar, he asked her, did Amnon do something to you? And so then she broke down crying, and she explained to her brother what had happened. And so Absalom, he was mad about it. And so he went and he tried to talk to his father about it, but his father wasn't trying to hear what he had to say. And so Absalom, he stood on what he was going to do to get revenge on his brother, on his half-brother Amnon, for I think it was 2 to 3 years before he finally got the opportunity to get Amnon killed. And so he stood on that for a long time. And that is what sin will do, is it will take us to a place that we never thought that we would go, keep us longer than we want to be there, and have us pay a price that we never thought we would have to pay. And so, it was kind of like King David had taken Bathsheba back in the day, and now here this is coming back around to haunt him with his children. And so not only had the child that him and Bathsheba had passed away, but this sin had also been passed down to the next generation of his children, where his children were now doing things that was as a direct result of what had happened between Bathsheba and King David. And so Absalom, after he had his brother killed, of course, he had to go into hiding. King David requested that, that they chase after him, and Tamar, she just kind of went on for the rest of her life. It wasn't a whole lot more that was talked about in regards to Tamar after that. You don't hear nothing else about her. So I don't know, the Bible does not speak on whether she ever got married to someone else. I was never able to find out anything that whether she had got married or anything else. From my understanding, what happened was that she just became a part of King David's harem, and she was just a little bit more than a servant. But I don't think that she ever received a husband of her own. And so a few years after Absalom had Amnon, his brother, killed, he led a revolt against his father, King David, and he was able to take over the royal city of Jerusalem, forcing his father to flee. So not only did he wind up killing his half brother, but he wind up basically booting his father out of the kingdom and chasing his father for many years. And so when he kicked his father out of the kingdom, what he did was he raped a lot of the women that used to belong to King David, and he raped them on the rooftop to make sure that everybody could see. And so as you can see, that the sins that we commit, they always, as the older people would say, the chickens came back to roost. And so what had happened with King David and Bathsheba years before wind up coming right back around to King David. So that is my story about Tamar, and hopefully you got something out of it. I pray that you have a very blessed day, and that you remember that you will eventually reap what you sow. Be blessed.